Black woman accused of trespassing on private jet. She's the CEO and fires them in minutes. How far would you go to fight for respect, for fairness, for change? Today we dive into the journey of a woman who shattered assumptions and reclaimed her power in the most unexpected way. It's not just a story of leadership. It's a lesson in resilience and the courage to confront what's wrong. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now, let's get into it. The private jet terminal buzzed with quiet energy, the faint hum of engines in the background blending with the polite murmurs of well-dressed travelers. A polished chandelier cast a warm glow over the sleek marble floors, and the occasional clatter of luggage wheels echoed through the air. Amid the elegance, Nina James stepped out of her black sedan, her heels clicking softly as she approached the glass doors. Nina's appearance turned heads, not for her beauty, though she was striking in her own right, but for her effortless confidence. Dressed in tailored slacks and a crisp white blouse, she carried herself with the air of someone who belonged. Her designer handbag, understated but clearly expensive, rested lightly in the crook of her arm. Yet it wasn't her attire or accessories that drew attention. It was her calm authority, the unshakable presence of someone who didn't need to prove herself to anyone. Still, the whispers started the moment she entered. "Who's that?" a ground crew member murmured to his colleague near the reception desk. "No idea," the other replied, his tone laced with skepticism. "Doesn't look like the usual clientele." Nina caught their glances out of the corner of her eye but didn't react. She was used to it by now, the way assumptions were made before a single word was exchanged. She didn't let it bother her. After all, she wasn't here for their approval. At the counter, the receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a professional smile, greeted Nina with polite detachment. "Good afternoon, ma'am. May I help you?" "Yes," Nina said, her voice steady. "I'm here for the Aurora jet on the East Tarmac." The receptionist's smile faltered for a brief moment, her eyes flicking over Nina as though assessing whether she could possibly afford such an exclusive aircraft. Regaining her composure, she nodded and tapped a few keys on her keyboard. "The Aurora jet, you said. Do you have a reservation?" Nina's lips curved into a small smile. "I don't need one, it's my jet." The receptionist's fingers paused mid-typing. Her polite mask cracked slightly, replaced by a look of barely concealed surprise. "Your jet?" she repeated, as though she hadn't heard correctly. Nina inclined her head, still smiling. "That's correct." Before the receptionist could respond, the sound of heavy boots interrupted the moment. Mike, the head of ground operations, approached with brisk authority, his fluorescent safety vest catching the light. His face was weathered from years on the tarmac, and his expression carried a permanent scowl that seemed to deepen as he looked Nina over. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice gruff. The receptionist hesitated, clearly uncertain how to handle the situation. "She's claiming the Aurora jet is hers," she said carefully. Mike's scowl deepened as he turned his full attention to Nina. He gave her a slow, deliberate once-over, his gaze lingering on her casual elegance with thinly veiled disdain. "That's a private jet," he said. "You can't just walk in here and claim it's yours." Nina met his gaze, her smile fading. "I'm not claiming anything. It is mine." A scoff escaped Mike's lips, and he crossed his arms. "Listen, lady. I don't know how you got in here, but this isn't some commercial airline where you can sneak onto a flight. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have security escort you out." The terminal seemed to go silent as passengers and staff began to take notice of the escalating confrontation. Whispers filled the air, some curious, others openly judgmental. "She doesn't look like she belongs here," someone muttered. "Maybe she's lost," another suggested. Nina straightened her posture, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Do you always treat your clients this way?" she asked, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You're not a client," Mike snapped. "You're trespassing." Before Nina could respond, a pair of security guards appeared at Mike's signal. One of them, a tall man with a clipboard, approached Nina with a mix of caution and authority. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step aside and provide some identification." Nina's gaze didn't waver. She reached into her handbag, but instead of producing an ID, she pulled out her phone. "I don't think that will be necessary," she said, dialing a number with practiced ease. "What do you think you're doing?" Mike demanded, his tone turning harsher. Nina raised a finger to signal him to wait as the call connected. Her voice softened, but the steel in her words was unmistakable. "Jordan, I need you at the terminal. Bring the documents." Mike opened his mouth to protest, but something in Nina's unwavering composure made him pause. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag, her expression calm, but her eyes flashing with quiet fire. "I suggest you prepare yourself," Nina said, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "This situation is about to change very quickly." For a moment, no one spoke. The onlookers, the staff, even the security guards. Everyone seemed frozen in place, caught in the gravity of the moment. Nina's presence demanded attention, even as Mike's scowl deepened with frustration. The terminal's atmosphere shifted, tension hanging heavy in the air. It was the calm before the storm, and everyone could feel it. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second stretching the tension in the room like a taut wire. Nina remained still, standing near the reception desk with a poise that made her look out of place amid the chaotic energy of the terminal. Her eyes remained calm, scanning the room with quiet precision, but inside her mind was replaying every moment of the confrontation, steadying herself for what was about to unfold. Across the room, Mike fidgeted. His scowl hadn't disappeared, but it now carried a flicker of unease, the first sign that he might have underestimated the woman standing before him. He crossed his arms over his chest, his fluorescent vest crinkling loudly as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The guards stood on either side of him, their faces blank but their stances rigid, betraying their readiness to act at a moment's notice. The terminal's hum seemed to grow quieter. Passengers shuffled awkwardly, pretending not to stare but unable to look away. A child's voice rose briefly, only to be hushed by a parent who gestured toward Nina and whispered something inaudible. The staff behind the counter exchanged glances, their earlier confidence eroding as the seconds passed. Finally, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the heavy silence. Through the glass doors, a sleek black SUV glided to a stop in front of the terminal, its tinted windows gleaming under the afternoon sun. The driver stepped out first, a tall, sharply dressed man in a dark suit. He moved quickly, opening the passenger door with practiced precision. Out stepped Jordan, Nina's executive assistant, a lean man with an air of efficiency that seemed to command attention without effort. Jordan's appearance was sharp. Tailored trousers, a navy blazer, and an immaculate tie knotted at just the right angle. His expression, however, was unreadable, a mask of professionalism that gave nothing away. In his hand, he carried a slim leather folder, its contents invisible but its presence unmistakable. Inside the terminal, Mike's unease grew palpable. He straightened his posture, his arms falling to his sides as he exchanged uncertain glances with the guards. The receptionist behind the counter seemed to shrink slightly, her earlier confidence replaced by wide-eyed apprehension. Nina turned toward the doors as they opened, the faint scent of leather and cologne accompanying Jordan as he stepped inside. Their eyes met briefly, and a subtle nod passed between them, a signal, unspoken but understood. Jordan moved toward her without hesitation, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor in a steady, deliberate rhythm. "Miss James," he said, his voice low but firm as he handed her the folder. "Everything is prepared just as you requested." "Thank you, Jordan," Nina replied, taking the folder with a calm grace that belied the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. Mike cleared his throat loudly, stepping forward with a forced bravado. "And who might you be?" he asked, his voice tinged with irritation as he gestured toward Jordan. "This is a restricted area. You can't just waltz in here." Jordan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced at Nina, waiting for her cue. When she gave a slight nod, he turned to Mike, his expression remaining cool and unbothered. "I'm here on behalf of Miss James," Jordan said evenly, his tone carrying the authority of someone who didn't need to justify his presence. "The CEO of Aurora Aviation." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Mike's scowl faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He blinked, his mouth opening and closing as though struggling to form a coherent response. "CEO?" he stammered finally, his voice cracking slightly on the word. "You're saying she's the CEO?" Jordan's gaze didn't waver. "That's correct. And you," he added, his tone hardening slightly, "have just accused her of trespassing on her own jet." A ripple of whispers spread through the room, passengers and staff alike exchanging stunned looks. The guards shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence evaporating under the weight of the revelation. Even the receptionist, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, now looked visibly pale. Nina stepped forward then, the folder still in her hands but unopened. Her movements were deliberate, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she closed the distance between herself and Mike. She stopped just short of him, her gaze meeting his with a quiet intensity that made him flinch. "You seem surprised," she said, her voice low and measured, each word laced with an understated power. "Is it so hard to believe that someone like me could own not just the jet, but the very terminal you're standing in?" Mike swallowed audibly, his bravado crumbling under the weight of her words. I didn't know," he stammered. "I mean, there must have been some kind of misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Nina repeated, her tone sharpening like a blade. "You didn't even give me the courtesy of listening. You made assumptions based on what? The color of my skin, my attire?" Her words landed like thunderclaps, each one striking with precision. The room grew impossibly quiet, the tension so thick it felt as though the very air had turned solid. Nina let the silence linger, allowing the weight of her accusation to sink in. Finally, she opened the folder, pulling out a set of documents and handing them to Jordan. Without a word, he stepped forward and placed them on the reception desk, where the receptionist stared at them as though they were written in a language she couldn't comprehend. "These are the ownership documents for Aurora Aviation," Jordan said, his voice calm but firm. "Signed, sealed, and notarized. I trust there won't be any further questions about Miss James's identity or authority." Mike's face turned a deep shade of red, his earlier confidence now replaced by a mix of shame and fear. He looked at Nina, his mouth moving as though he wanted to apologize but couldn't find the words. Nina held his gaze for a moment longer before turning to Jordan. "Make sure everything is handled appropriately," she said, her tone leaving no room for interpretation. "I'll be boarding my jet now." With that, she walked past Mike and the guards, her steps steady and unhurried. The room seemed to part for her, passengers and staff alike stepping aside as though in the presence of royalty. Nina didn't look back. She didn't need to. The storm she had unleashed was only just beginning. The heavy steel door to the tarmac groaned as it opened, letting in a gust of crisp air mixed with the distant hum of jet engines. Nina James stepped through with an air of quiet authority, her heels clicking against the concrete as she approached her private jet. The Aurora jet stood like a gleaming sentinel under the afternoon sun, its metallic body reflecting the world around it. It was both a symbol of her success and a testament to the years of work it had taken to get here. Behind her, the terminal doors swung shut with a soft hiss, muffling the whispers and murmurs of the gawking onlookers. Nina didn't need to hear them to know what they were saying. The expressions on their faces moments ago had said it all. Disbelief, confusion, embarrassment. It wasn't the first time she'd walked into a room and upended expectations, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. The roar of an engine starting in the distance brought her thoughts back to the moment. A member of her flight crew, dressed sharply in the Aurora Aviation uniform, descended the staircase of the jet, his posture straight and professional. As he reached the tarmac, he greeted her with a small, respectful bow. "Miss James," he said, his voice steady. "The aircraft is ready for departure whenever you are." "Thank you, Mr. Andrews," Nina replied, offering a faint but warm smile. "Please ensure everything is in perfect order. I'll be boarding shortly." "Yes, ma'am." Mr. Andrews turned briskly, ascending the stairs to oversee final preparations. Nina paused for a moment at the foot of the staircase, her hand resting lightly on the railing. She allowed herself a brief glance back at the terminal. Through the large glass windows, she could see the commotion she had left behind, a flurry of hurried movements and panicked discussions as Jordan addressed the terminal staff with a calm but commanding presence. Jordan stood near the reception desk, flipping through the folder with precision. The employees clustered around him looked increasingly uneasy, their earlier bravado completely stripped away. Mike, now pale and visibly sweating, shifted uncomfortably, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets as though trying to hide his trembling fingers. "Let me make this clear," Jordan said, his tone firm but even. He looked each of them in the eye as he spoke, his gaze lingering on Mike. "Miss James is not just a client of Aurora Aviation. She is the CEO, the owner, and the reason every single one of you has a job." His words landed heavily, and the room seemed to shrink under the weight of them. The receptionist, her earlier composure shattered, stammered, We didn't realize." "That's the problem," Jordan interrupted, his voice cutting through her apology. "You didn't take the time to realize. Instead, you made assumptions that led to blatant disrespect and unprofessional behavior toward the very person who signs your paychecks." Mike finally found his voice, though it cracked under the pressure. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it, I just thought—" "That she didn't belong?" Jordan asked sharply, raising an eyebrow. "You thought her appearance was enough to question her right to be here? To humiliate her in front of an entire terminal?" Mike opened his mouth to respond but found no words. He looked away, his face flushing with shame. Jordan's gaze didn't waver. "Aurora Aviation prides itself on its commitment to excellence both in service and in values. Discrimination and disrespect have no place here. And yet today, Miss James experienced both at the hands of her own staff." He turned to the receptionist and the security guards, his tone softening slightly but remaining firm. "For the rest of you, consider this a learning moment. Reflect on how your actions, or lack of action, contributed to this situation. Miss James expects better, and so should you." Finally, Jordan faced Mike, his voice dropping to a cold, precise tone. "As for you, Mr. Bennett, your conduct was unacceptable on every level. Effective immediately, your employment with Aurora Aviation is terminated. You'll be escorted off the premises within the hour." The silence that followed was deafening. Mike's face turned ashen, and he stumbled back a step, his mouth opening in disbelief. "You're firing me. After all these years." "After all these years, you should have known better," Jordan said firmly. "This decision comes from Miss James herself. You'll receive a formal letter detailing the terms of your termination." Mike looked around the room, his eyes darting to the receptionist, the guards, anyone who might come to his defense. But no one moved. No one spoke. They all knew the truth. There was no defending what had happened. Nina ascended the steps slowly, each step deliberate, as though marking a transition, not just from one physical space to another, but from one chapter of the day to the next. At the top, Mr. Andrews greeted her again, holding the door open as she stepped into the luxurious cabin. The interior of the Aurora jet was as immaculate as she remembered. Plush leather seats, polished wood accents, and a faint scent of lavender that added an air of serenity. The jet wasn't just a mode of transportation. It was her sanctuary in the sky. As she settled into her seat, a flight attendant approached with a glass of sparkling water and a respectful nod. "Welcome aboard, Miss James. Please let us know if there's anything you need." "Thank you," Nina said, taking the glass with a small smile. "I'm fine for now." The attendant retreated, leaving Nina alone with her thoughts. She sipped the water slowly, the cool bubbles soothing her throat as she gazed out the window. The terminal, now distant, was barely visible through the tinted glass. Nina thought of Mike, of his arrogance, and the way it had crumbled under the weight of reality. She didn't relish in his downfall, but she felt no sympathy either. His actions had consequences that he had brought upon himself. As the engines roared to life, Nina leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. The day had been exhausting, but it had also been a reminder of her journey, of the obstacles she had overcome and the strength it had taken to reach this point. She wasn't just a woman who owned a jet. She was a woman who owned her story, her power, and her future. The soft hum of the jet engines filled the cabin, a steady, soothing backdrop as Nina James reclined in her seat. The leather cushions molded perfectly to her form, a quiet testament to the attention to detail she demanded in every aspect of her life. The cabin's subtle ambient lighting bathed the space in a warm glow, creating an atmosphere of calm that Nina welcomed after the turbulence of the day. Through the oval window beside her, the vast sky stretched endlessly, a canvas painted in soft gradients of orange and pink as the sun began its descent. The sight was one she had grown accustomed to over the years, yet it never failed to inspire her. There was something about being above the clouds that made the challenges of the world below seem smaller, more manageable. Still, today's events lingered in her mind, replaying in fragments that refused to settle. She wasn't angry, at least not anymore. What she felt now was something more complex, a mixture of disappointment, resolve, and a quiet determination to ensure that what had happened would not happen again. As the jet leveled out at cruising altitude, Nina reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled with neatly written notes, sketches, and reflections, a personal journal she carried everywhere. Flipping to a fresh page, she tapped the pen against the paper for a moment, her thoughts swirling. Her mind drifted back to her early days, long before she had ever dreamed of owning a jet or running a company. She thought of the small apartment where she had grown up, the peeling wallpaper and the persistent drip of the kitchen faucet that her mother never had time to fix. Back then, money was always tight, and dreams often felt like luxuries they couldn't afford. But her mother, Evelyn James, had been a relentless optimist. "You can be anything, Nina," she would say, her voice filled with conviction as she braided Nina's hair before school. "Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Nina smiled faintly at the memory. Her mother's words had been both a comfort and a challenge, a reminder of the expectations placed on her shoulders. She had carried those words with her through every obstacle, every moment of doubt, and every triumph. The flight attendant returned quietly, her presence barely noticeable until she spoke. "Miss James, would you like anything else? A meal, perhaps?" Nina shook her head, offering a polite smile. "No, thank you. Just some tea would be lovely." "Of course, I'll bring it right away." As the attendant disappeared into the galley, Nina turned her attention back to her notebook. She began to write, her pen moving steadily across the page as she captured her thoughts. She wrote about the incident at the terminal, not just the details, but the emotions it had stirred in her. The disbelief, the frustration, the resolve. She also wrote about Mike, about the biases that had led to his downfall, and the systemic issues she knew extended far beyond him. Leadership wasn't just about making decisions, she reminded herself. It was about setting an example, about creating a culture where respect and inclusion weren't just ideals, but realities. The events of the day had been a stark reminder that even in a company she had built from the ground up, there was still work to be done. The soft chime of her phone interrupted her thoughts. Glancing at the screen, she saw Jordan's name and answered with a swipe, bringing the phone to her ear. "Jordan," she said, her tone calm but curious. "I take it everything is handled?" "Completely," Jordan replied, his voice steady as ever. "Mike has been escorted off the premises, and I've scheduled a meeting with the rest of the terminal staff for tomorrow. We'll be implementing a mandatory training program on bias and professional conduct." "Good," Nina said, nodding slightly. Make sure it's thorough. I want every employee to understand that what happened today is unacceptable and that we're committed to doing better. Understood. And one more thing, Jordan added after a brief pause. I've also reviewed the terminal's performance reports. There were a few red flags, nothing major, but worth addressing. I'll send you the details. Thank you, Jordan, Nina said, a note of gratitude in her voice. I knew I could count on you. It's my job, he replied, though there was a hint of warmth in his tone. Safe travels, Miss James. As the call ended, Nina set her phone aside and leaned back in her seat, her eyes drifting to the window. The sky had darkened, the last rays of sunlight fading into a deep indigo. Stars began to appear, scattered across the heavens like tiny diamonds. Her tea arrived, its delicate aroma filling the cabin. She sipped it slowly, savoring the warmth as it spread through her. The day had been long, but it had also been a reminder of her purpose. She hadn't built Aurora Aviation just to prove something to the world. She had built it to create something better, a company that stood for excellence, innovation, and integrity. As the jet continued its journey, Nina felt a renewed sense of determination. There would always be challenges, always be moments where she would have to fight against the biases and assumptions of others. But she was ready. She had faced them before, and she would face them again, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated. Closing her eyes, Nina let the hum of the engines lull her into a rare moment of rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to lead. But for now, she allowed herself to simply be, a woman who had climbed higher than anyone had expected and who had no intention of coming down. The soft light of dawn streamed through the penthouse windows, casting long, golden streaks across the minimalist decor. Nina James sat at the marble-topped breakfast bar, her fingers curled around a warm cup of coffee. The aroma of freshly brewed beans filled the space, mingling with the faint citrus scent of the lilies arranged in a crystal vase nearby. The events of the previous day still lingered in her mind, not as a source of anger, but as a reminder of the work that remained. She wasn't one to dwell. There was no time for that in her world, but she believed in reflection, in learning from every encounter, no matter how unpleasant. Her phone buzzed softly on the counter, its vibration breaking the tranquil silence. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Jordan. Staff meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. Documentation prepared. We'll update you afterward. Nina smiled faintly, her trust in Jordan's efficiency reaffirmed. He was more than an assistant. He was her right hand, someone who understood her vision and executed it with precision. Placing the phone back on the counter, she took another sip of her coffee, her gaze drifting to the skyline. The city below was just beginning to stir, the streets filling with cars and pedestrians, each person embarking on their own journey. It was a humbling sight, a reminder of the countless lives that moved through the world simultaneously, each with its own struggles and triumphs. After finishing her coffee, Nina rose from her seat and walked toward the master bedroom, her steps soft against the hardwood floors. The room was a haven of calm, with neutral tones and clean lines that reflected her preference for simplicity. On the bed lay the outfit she had chosen the night before, a tailored navy dress paired with a subtle string of pearls. It was professional yet unassuming, a reflection of her approach to leadership. As she dressed, she thought about the staff meeting Jordan had arranged. She trusted him to handle it with the professionalism and care he always exhibited. But she also knew her presence might carry weight. It wasn't just about addressing the incident with Mike. It was about setting a tone, a standard that everyone would understand. Nina caught her reflection in the mirror as she fastened the pearls around her neck. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried a quiet intensity. She had learned long ago that leadership wasn't about commanding authority. It was about earning respect. And respect, she believed, began with integrity. By the time Nina arrived at the private terminal, the sun was fully risen, casting a warm glow over the sleek modern building. The glass facade reflected the blue sky, its sharp angles a testament to the cutting-edge brand she had built. Stepping out of the car, she adjusted her bag on her shoulder and walked toward the entrance, her heels clicking softly against the polished pavement. Inside, the atmosphere was markedly different from the day before. The staff were noticeably more alert, their movements precise and their expressions focused. There was an air of nervous energy, as though everyone was acutely aware of her presence. Jordan greeted her at the entrance to the meeting room, his suit impeccable as always. He carried a tablet in one hand, a folder in the other, his expression calm but serious. "Miss James," he said with a small nod, "everything is ready. The staff are assembled and awaiting your address." "Thank you, Jordan," Nina replied, her voice steady. "Let's not keep them waiting." The meeting room was a spacious, modern space with a large glass table at its center. Around it sat the terminal staff, their faces a mix of apprehension and determination. As Nina entered, the quiet murmur of conversation ceased, replaced by an expectant silence. Nina took her place at the head of the table, her posture straight but not rigid. She allowed a moment of silence to settle, her gaze sweeping the room before she began to speak. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I want to start by thanking you all for being here today. I know yesterday's events were difficult, and I appreciate your willingness to address them openly." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "What happened yesterday was not just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger issue, an issue that I take very seriously. Aurora Aviation was built on the principles of excellence, respect, and inclusion. When those principles are compromised, it reflects on all of us." The room remained silent, but she could see the weight of her words registering with the staff. Some looked down at the table, others nodded slightly, their expressions thoughtful. "I'm not here to assign blame," Nina continued. "I'm here to ensure that we learn from this and move forward together. That means taking responsibility, not just for our actions, but for the culture we create. It means recognizing our biases and working to overcome them." She turned her attention to Jordan, who stepped forward with a quiet confidence. "Jordan has prepared a new training program on bias and professional conduct, which will be mandatory for all employees. This is not a punishment. It's an opportunity to grow, to ensure that what happened yesterday never happens again." As Jordan outlined the details of the program, Nina watched the staff carefully. She saw relief in some faces, determination in others. There was a shared understanding in the room, a recognition that change was not just necessary but inevitable. After the meeting concluded, Nina lingered in the room, her thoughts lingering on the discussions that had taken place. She was about to leave when one of the younger staff members, a woman named Claire, approached her hesitantly. "Miss James," Claire said, her voice quiet but steady. "May I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course," Nina replied, gesturing for her to sit. Claire hesitated before speaking, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened yesterday. I wasn't directly involved, but I saw what was happening, and I didn't say anything. I should have." Nina regarded her with a thoughtful expression. "Thank you for telling me, Claire. It takes courage to admit when we've fallen short. I want to do better," Claire said, her voice breaking slightly. "I want to be part of the solution." "You already are," Nina said gently. "Acknowledging the problem is the first step. Now, it's about action." Claire nodded, her eyes shining with determination. As she left the room, Nina felt a renewed sense of hope. Change, she realized, didn't happen overnight. It happened in moments like this, in the quiet decisions people made to be better. As Nina walked out of the terminal and into the bright morning light, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The work was far from over, but they were moving in the right direction. And that, she thought, was a victory worth savoring. The day stretched on as Nina James returned to her office, a sleek, spacious corner of Aurora Aviation's headquarters overlooking the city skyline. The walls were lined with understated art, chosen more for their calming tones than for their prominence in the art world. A large glass desk dominated the room, its surface immaculate save for her laptop, a leather notebook, and a framed photo of her mother, Evelyn James, whose warm smile seemed to radiate encouragement even from behind the glass. Nina set her bag down carefully on a side table and sank into her high-backed chair. The weight of the morning's meeting lingered in her mind, not in a heavy way, but as a reminder of the responsibility she carried. It wasn't just about running a company. It was about leading by example, ensuring that every corner of her business reflected the values she held dear. She turned her gaze to the photo of her mother, letting her thoughts drift. Evelyn's story had always been Nina's compass, a guiding force that reminded her of where she came from and why she fought so hard to succeed. Nina closed her eyes, and the memory of her childhood home came flooding back. It was small and modest, with walls that carried the faint scent of lavender from the sachets Evelyn kept tucked in drawers. Despite its size, the house always felt full, of warmth, of laughter, of determination. Evelyn had been a single mother, raising Nina on her own after her father left when she was just a toddler. There was no time for self-pity in Evelyn's world. She worked long hours as a nurse, often picking up extra shifts to make ends meet. Yet she always found time to sit with Nina in the evenings, helping her with homework or reading stories aloud until they both fell asleep on the worn living room couch. "I don't have much," Evelyn had once told Nina during one of those quiet evenings. "But what I have, I give to you. And one day, you'll take that and turn it into something extraordinary." Those words had stayed with Nina, etched into her heart. They had been her fuel during long nights of studying, during moments of doubt when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear. Nina opened her eyes and reached for her desk drawer, pulling out a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of keepsakes, a pressed flower from her mother's garden, a ticket stub from her first business trip, and at the very bottom an envelope worn soft with age. She unfolded the envelope carefully, her fingers brushing against the creases. It was a letter Evelyn had written to her on the day Nina had graduated from college. The words were as vivid now as they had been then. "Dear Nina, today you stand on the threshold of a new journey. Watching you walk across that stage, I felt a pride that words could never fully capture. You've worked so hard, faced so much, and yet here you are, stronger, wiser, and ready to take on the world. Life won't always be kind, my love. There will be moments when you'll question your place in it, moments when others will try to define your worth for you. But remember this, you are not defined by their opinions. You are defined by your resilience, your kindness, and the dreams you refuse to let go of. I may not always be with you in person, but I will always be with you in spirit. Every step you take, every barrier you break, I'll be there, cheering you on. With all my love, always, Mom." Nina felt a familiar sting behind her eyes as she folded the letter back into the envelope. Her mother had passed away shortly after Nina started her first job, but her presence remained in every corner of Nina's life. Every decision she made, every success she achieved was in honor of Evelyn's unwavering belief in her. The buzz of her phone pulled Nina back to the present. She glanced at the screen. It was Jordan again. Taking a steadying breath, she answered. "Jordan," she said, her voice soft but composed. "What's the update?" "The training program is scheduled to begin next week," Jordan replied. "I've also reached out to an external consultancy to conduct an audit of our hiring and workplace practices. I thought it might be useful to get an impartial perspective." "Good thinking," Nina said. "Let's make sure this isn't just about correcting mistakes, but about building a stronger foundation." "There's something else," Jordan added after a pause. "Claire, one of the staff members, asked if she could share her story at the first training session. She said yesterday's meeting inspired her to speak up about some challenges she's faced." Nina's lips curved into a small smile. "That's exactly the kind of progress we need. Tell Claire I'd be honored if she shared her story." "Will do," Jordan said. "Anything else you'd like me to focus on?" "Just keep an eye on the team," Nina said. "These changes won't be easy for everyone, but they're necessary. Make sure they know I'm here to support them." "Understood," Jordan replied. "I'll keep you updated." As the call ended, Nina leaned back in her chair, her thoughts lingering on Claire. It was a small step, but it was a start. Change didn't happen overnight, but it happened in moments like these, in the courage of individuals willing to speak up, in the willingness of a team to listen and grow. Nina stood and walked to the window, her arms crossed as she gazed out at the city below. The streets were alive with movement, each car, each person a reminder of the interconnectedness of their lives. She thought about her role in that tapestry, not just as a business leader, but as a symbol of what was possible. Evelyn's words echoed in her mind. Every step you take, every barrier you break. Nina smiled softly. There were still barriers to break, still steps to take, and she would take them, not just for herself, but for the countless others who needed someone to pave the way. The evening settled over the city, cloaking it in a gentle veil of twilight. From her corner office, Nina James watched as the streetlights flickered to life one by one, their golden glow outlining the busy streets below. The rhythmic hum of her office clock was the only sound in the quiet room, an unspoken reminder of time steadily passing. Yet, Nina remained still, lost in thought. Her desk, usually a bastion of organization, bore signs of a day steeped in decision-making. Open files and reports lay scattered across its surface, their pages marked with notes in her precise handwriting. The weight of the day's responsibilities pressed against her, not in an oppressive way, but as a firm reminder of the path she had chosen. Nina leaned back in her chair, her gaze shifting from the city lights to the framed photograph of her mother on her desk. The sight of Evelyn's smiling face brought a momentary sense of peace, grounding her in the purpose that had guided her through the years. A soft knock at her office door broke the silence. Startled from her reverie, Nina straightened and called out, "Come in." The door opened slowly, revealing Claire, the young staff member who had approached her after the meeting earlier that day. Claire hesitated in the doorway, clutching a folder to her chest, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Miss James," Claire began softly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Nina replied, gesturing for her to enter. "Please come in." Claire stepped into the office, her movements tentative. She glanced around, taking in the pristine elegance of the space before settling her eyes on Nina. "I wanted to thank you again for hearing me out earlier, and I have something I thought you should see." Nina tilted her head slightly, her curiosity piqued. "Of course, have a seat." Claire sat across from her, carefully placing the folder on the desk. Her hands lingered on it for a moment before she pushed it toward Nina. "These are some notes I've been keeping," she explained, "about things I've noticed at the terminal, small incidents that didn't feel right but seemed too insignificant to report at the time." Nina opened the folder, her eyes scanning the neatly typed pages within. Each entry detailed an event, a dismissive comment, a biased assumption, a subtle but telling gesture. Individually, they might have seemed minor, but together they painted a troubling picture of a culture that had quietly allowed prejudice to take root. "You've been keeping track of this for a while," Nina said, her voice measured as she looked up at Claire. Claire nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I didn't know what to do with it," she admitted. "But after what happened yesterday, I realized I couldn't just keep it to myself anymore. If we're going to change things, I thought this might be a place to start." Nina closed the folder gently, her expression thoughtful. "This is important, Claire," she said after a moment, "and I appreciate you bringing it to me. It takes courage to speak up, especially about something as deeply ingrained as this." Claire exhaled a quiet sigh of relief, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I just want things to be better," she said, "for everyone." "So do I," Nina replied, her tone firm. "And that's why we're going to address this, together." After Claire left, Nina remained at her desk, the folder open before her. She read through each entry carefully, her mind piecing together the broader implications of what she was seeing. The incidents weren't just isolated moments. They were symptoms of a deeper issue that needed to be confronted head-on. She reached for her notebook and began outlining a plan. Her pen moved steadily across the page as she detailed the steps they would take, not just to address the specific incidents Claire had documented, but to root out the underlying causes that had allowed them to occur. The first step, she decided, would be to create an anonymous reporting system. Employees needed a safe and accessible way to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. The second step would involve revisiting their hiring and training practices, ensuring that diversity and inclusion weren't just ideals, but actionable priorities. And the third step would focus on accountability, establishing clear consequences for behavior that violated the company's values. As the plan took shape, Nina felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fixing problems. It was about building something better, something that could withstand the scrutiny of both their customers and their employees. The clock on the wall struck 10, its chime barely audible over the rustle of papers. Nina stretched her arms over her head, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. She glanced at her phone, debating whether to call it a night or make one last connection before heading home. After a moment's hesitation, she dialed Jordan's number. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice calm but tinged with surprise. "Miss James," he said. "Still working, I see." "Guilty," Nina replied with a small smile. "I wanted to run something by you before tomorrow. Are you free to talk?" "Always," Jordan said. "What's on your mind?" Nina outlined her plan, her words steady and precise as she described the steps she envisioned. Jordan listened without interruption, his silence a testament to his focus. When she finished, he responded thoughtfully. "It's a solid plan," he said. "Ambitious but necessary. I think it'll resonate with the team, especially if you present it personally." "That's the idea," Nina said. "We need to show them that this isn't just about policies. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels valued and respected." "I'll start drafting the framework tonight," Jordan said. "We can finalize it tomorrow and roll it out during the first training session." "Thank you, Jordan," Nina said, her voice warm with gratitude. "I don't say it enough, but I couldn't do this without you." "It's my privilege to support you," he replied. "You set the vision. I just help bring it to life." As the call ended, Nina felt a sense of calm settle over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone. Together, she and her team would face the challenges, one step at a time. The city outside her window had grown quiet, its lights twinkling like distant stars against the darkened sky. Nina closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair, her thoughts drifting once more to the photograph of her mother. "Every step you take, every barrier you break," Evelyn's voice echoed in her memory. Nina smiled softly, the words a balm against the weight of the day. She turned off the desk lamp, the room bathed now only in the soft glow of the city lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she allowed herself a moment of stillness, a moment to remember why she fought so hard, and for whom. As she gathered her things and walked toward the elevator, the quiet hum of progress seemed to follow her. Change wasn't easy, but it was possible, and Nina James was determined to lead the way. The next morning, the soft light of dawn filtered through the tall windows of Aurora Aviation's headquarters, painting the marble floors with streaks of gold. Nina James stood in the conference room, her back to the wide expanse of glass. Behind her, the city stirred to life, but Nina's focus was entirely on the task ahead. The room was set for the first session of the new training program, a cornerstone of the changes she had initiated following the incidents at the terminal. The table before her held a neatly organized stack of training materials, each packet bearing the Aurora Aviation logo embossed in silver. A sleek projector hummed quietly in the background, its light casting the agenda onto the wall. Building a culture of respect, the Aurora way. Nina smoothed her dress, her fingers lingering on the soft fabric as she steadied her breath. She wasn't nervous. Public speaking had become second nature to her over the years, but there was a weight to this moment that she didn't take lightly. It wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of a new chapter for her company. As the clock approached 9, the staff began to file into the room. Claire was among the first to arrive, her movements hesitant but her expression resolute. She gave Nina a small smile as she took her seat near the front, clutching a notebook tightly in her hands. Others followed, managers, ground crew members, flight attendants, until every chair was filled. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. At exactly 9 o'clock, Jordan entered, his presence as composed as ever. He carried a clipboard and a tablet, his sharp suit reflecting the professionalism that had become his signature. He gave Nina a slight nod as he moved to stand by her side. "All present and accounted for," he murmured softly. Nina nodded, then stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The room fell silent as she took her place at the head of the table, her presence commanding without being overbearing. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you all for being here today. I know this session is different from what you're used to, and I appreciate your willingness to participate." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. Today is about more than training. It's about reflection, accountability, and most importantly, growth. Aurora Aviation has always prided itself on excellence, not just in service but in values. And if we are to continue living up to that standard, we must ensure that every individual in this company feels respected, valued, and heard. After her introduction, Nina gestured toward Claire, who sat up straighter at the sound of her name. Before we begin, Claire has graciously agreed to share her perspective. Her story is a powerful reminder of why this work is so important. Claire rose slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her notebook. She took a deep breath, her gaze flickering to Nina, who offered a reassuring nod. "When I first joined Aurora Aviation," Claire began, her voice quiet but steady, "I was excited. This company stood for something I believed in: innovation, integrity, inclusion. But over time, I started noticing things that didn't align with those values." She hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the podium. "I saw co-workers being dismissed or overlooked because of their backgrounds or appearances. I heard comments that made me feel like I didn't belong, and I stayed silent because I thought maybe it wasn't my place to speak up." Her voice broke slightly, but she pressed on. "Yesterday, I realized that silence is part of the problem. Change can't happen if we don't acknowledge what's wrong, so I'm here today, not just to share my experiences but to learn how we can all do better, together." The room was silent as Claire finished, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. Nina stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Claire's shoulder. "Thank you, Claire," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "Your courage is a gift to all of us, and I promise you it won't be wasted." For the next hour, the session unfolded with purpose and clarity. Nina and Jordan led discussions on implicit bias, workplace respect, and the importance of inclusivity. The material was interactive, encouraging the staff to share their thoughts and reflect on their experiences. At first, the responses were cautious, but as the session progressed, a sense of openness began to take hold. One of the ground crew members, a middle-aged man named Carlos, spoke up. "I didn't realize how much my assumptions affected the way I treated people," he admitted. "Hearing Claire's story made me think about my own actions. I want to do better." Another employee, a flight attendant named Janet, nodded in agreement. "It's easy to overlook things when they don't directly affect you," she said. "But that doesn't mean it's okay. We all have a responsibility to create a better environment." Nina listened intently, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and resolve. This was what leadership looked like, not just directing change, but witnessing it in real time. As the session drew to a close, Nina stood once more, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Today is just the beginning," she said. "What we've discussed here isn't a one-time initiative. It's a commitment to ongoing growth. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. And together we can build a culture that reflects the values we all believe in." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "I want to leave you with this. Every action you take, every choice you make shapes the world we create. Let's choose to create something extraordinary." The room erupted into applause, the sound filling the space with a sense of unity. As the staff began to file out, Nina watched them with a quiet satisfaction. Today had been a step forward, a small step, but an important one. After the room had emptied, Nina sat alone at the table, her hands resting lightly on the polished surface. Jordan entered quietly, taking the seat beside her. "That went well," he said, his tone warm. "It did," Nina agreed, though her voice carried a note of introspection. "But there's still so much to do." "There always will be," Jordan replied. "But you've set the tone. That's what matters." Nina nodded, her gaze drifting to the city beyond the window. "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough," she admitted. "If I'm doing enough." "You are," Jordan said firmly. "And the fact that you're asking that question proves it." Nina smiled faintly, the weight on her shoulders feeling just a little lighter. Together they sat in silence, the room bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. There was work to be done, but for now, there was also hope. And so her story isn't just about power or success. It's about standing tall in the face of doubt, about creating change where it's needed most. It's a reminder that true leadership is about more than titles. It's about the impact you leave behind. If this story inspired you or made you think, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Together, let's explore more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the strength within us all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.